Two boys playing outside have a close encounter of the 1863rd kind. What does that even mean? I don't know either. And then we take a look at a bizarre conspiracy currently sweeping across the internet. Is it possible that horses used to lay giant eggs? Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I'm actually awfully sick. But other than that, everything's great. And I hope you're feeling well, and I hope you're doing great too. And I hope you guys had a really cool Christmas, really cool, happy holiday season. I've spent most of it sick, but I don't want to focus on that. Like, do I have to hear you sniffling your nose for however long this episode is? I don't know. I'm kind of powering through it. I got a pretty bad sore throat. But I won't bring it up anymore. You're like, obviously, Jason, you're sick. You're sick. Yeah, I think I have strep throat. I'm on antibiotics still. But someone who never takes antibiotics, someone who's healthy all the time, running into Dead Rabbit Radio Command is our newest Patreon supporter. Manual Venitator. What was it? Manual Venitator. Woohoo! Yeah, big old potato. Yummy. Big old potato rolling on in. Manual Venator, I think is how you pronounce it. When you support the Patreon, you get 2 shout-outs. He got a shout-out last week, and it took this long to get him a second shout-out. And I apologize for that. Manuel, you're going to be our captain, our pilot this episode. If you guys can't support the show financially through the Patreon or the merch store or anything like that, it's totally fine. It really is. Just help spread the word about Dead Rabbit Radio. That helps out so much. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell everyone you know. Dead Rabbit Radio is your favorite paranormal show. That is how you can help the show grow, okay? We're on a bit of a crunch, right? Because I feel terrible. I've been recording for like 10 minutes and I'm sicker than I was 11 minutes ago. So let's go ahead and get this party started. Manual, I'm going to go ahead and toss you the Jason jetpack. Everyone climb on board. It's just a one-person vehicle. We're all sitting on his shoulders. He's flying us out of Dead Rabbit Radio Command all the way out to Virginia. Nice, curvy jetpack trip. Who doesn't want a jetpack? I always wanted a jetpack. And it's not like when I was a little kid. I remember when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I'd be laying in bed and I'd be like, I got to go to work today. But I just wanted to fly to work. And I would just, I don't know if that's like a normal thing. I'd always spend about 10 to 20 minutes a day wondering, why don't I have a jetpack and fly around? And I'd sit there and daydream about landing in the parking lot. And with my jetpack on, all the girls are like, woo, you must have jetpack money. I was like, yeah, fuel costs a ton. Could you believe it? Jet fuel is very expensive. And all the honeys would come out and give me a kiss. But yeah, it was a weird reoccurring dream. Not even a dream. I'd be wide awake. I'd be sitting there eating cereal, being like, why don't I have a jetpack? This cereal would taste way more delicious 20 feet in the air. We head out to Virginia. Specifically, we're in Orange County, Virginia. We're going to meet 2 boys. We have Elliot. We don't have their real names, but because this was posted anonymously on the X board. We have Elliot, and then his younger brother we'll call Joe. Elliot said growing up in Orange County, Virginia, the area just had a ton of Civil War battlefields, which makes sense. Virginia was a big part of that war. He goes, you'd be walking around and you'd trip and you'd turn and you'd see a giant cannonball sitting there. He didn't actually say that. You're like, what is this kid, blind? How do you not notice a giant cannonball? No, I added that detail. He goes, you'd go to eat your cereal in the morning and there'd be Civil War bullets in your cereal. You're like, what? How did it get in my corn pops? There's a lot of places where the Civil War took place, is what he said. I was adding in those stupid details. But anyways, I'm trying to make this episode shorter so I can rest my throat. I don't know why I keep elaborating, then have to explain my lie. He grew up in an area where a lot of Civil War battles took place. His house, the yard, actually bordered on the woods. Both of these elements are important for this story. Well, one day him and his brother Joe were outside goofing off in the backyard when all of a sudden a man emerged from the woods. A man neither of them had ever seen before. And even though they hadn't seen him before, they're not dummies. They recognize that he's wearing a Civil War uniform. I'm sure they learn a lot about that in Virginia. When I went to public school in California, we learned not a ton about the Civil War, but we were constantly taught about the gold rush. I don't think they probably know about that in Virginia because they don't care. It didn't affect them. But so much of California was built and based on the gold rush, especially in Northern California. We take field trips to what was that fort called? Fort Knox. It wasn't Fort Knox. Fort Carson or something. Anyways, there's a famous guy in Fort Custer. There's a famous guy who came to Sacramento and built a fort and named it after himself. And he was, I think it was one of either the first people to find gold, or he just really liked gold. I don't remember what it was, and then the city grew up. This is almost like lost media or like some weird thing in my head. So I remember when I was a kid, they would always talk about the gold rush in school. And I changed schools every 2 years. So I was constantly having to relearn stuff. I probably know more about the California gold rush and the Holocaust than anyone, I should say than anyone else, but you know what I mean? Because every 2 years I changed schools and it was like I was being retaught something I had learned at a previous school. So there was always a section on the Holocaust. There was always a section on the California gold rush. Well, anyways, by the time I get in high school, I'm up in Sacramento. What does any of this have to do with the Civil War? Well, let me finish the story. Anyways, I remember in high school, we took a field trip to the fort where a bunch of gold rush stuff happened. I don't remember what, and I don't remember the name of the fort, but I remember when we went there on the field trip, I go, what? And this big wooden fort, Fort Sumter, this big wooden fort was right in the middle of downtown Sacramento. Like the city had sprung up around it, so you had like parks and skyscrapers and busy roads and traffic lights. But if you turned the corner, there was a big wooden fort, huge wooden fort, not like Lincoln Log Fort. Like big pieces of wood that had spikes on the top, right? Like, because you'd cut down the wood, you make it sharp in case someone wanted to climb over. They're like, it'd be the easiest trap to avoid. Just watch out for the giant 5-foot spike. But anyways, I remember going, well, golly, I didn't know that this fort was actually in the city of Sacramento. Like, you could work at a bank that's right across the street from this old fort. What was the name of the fort? Well, anyways, I went to it. It was boring, right? I never really liked field trips. I don't like museums or none of that stuff because all you do is you look at something behind glass and then you read a little description of it and then you go to the next thing and it's super boring. Like, unless the stuff in there is, like, really cool, like, this is the sword that they used to chop off the head of some sultan, and here's his head right next to it, perfectly preserved. I was like, wow, this is a cool museum. This is the gun that shot Lincoln. This is the gun that shot the guy who shot Lincoln. Stuff like that, right? Things that have killed people, and if I broke the glass, I could use them to kill more people. Most museums are super lame, though. You go there, and it's like, whoa, look at this giant life-size dinosaur. And then it says, that we only have the toe bone of a T-Rex. The rest of it we made with plaster. Well, that's dumb. Why am I looking at plaster? Anyways, we went to this fort and we walked around. And, it was kind of, the weirdest part was there was a fort in the middle of downtown Sacramento. Well, then years later, I told my buddies about that. We were just, I don't know how bored we were. They're like, hey, everyone, let's sit around and trade stories of field trips we took as a kid. I told people about this fort in the middle of Sacramento, and they said that's not true. I go, no, it's true. There's a fort in the middle of downtown Sacramento. Here's the thing. You're like, well, what's there? Here's the thing. When I started telling the story, I thought that we had gone looking for it and never found it. But now I'm wondering if we did go looking for it and did find it. Because that's not an interesting story at all. It's a story about my friends knowing less than I do, and I proved them right. But I thought we drove around and around and around, like holding them hostage. I have 2 pistols. This one killed Lincoln. This one killed John Wilkes Booth. Get in the car. We're finding that fort. I think we never found it again. I also think, at this point, we were all like 25. I think we had better things to do on the weekend than drive around looking for a wooden fort. But I'm pretty sure I never found that fort again. I wonder if it is some weird, it's either a false memory, or it is a weird combination of things, like different elements. Or maybe I came from a reality where a wooden fort was built in the middle of Sacramento. What was the name of that guy? He was super famous. He was a super gold man. Now, I could easily turn and look it up sitting in front of a computer, but I'd rather the mystery linger on this one. Fort Summer. Anyways, let's go back to a ghost story, which I'm sure you guys are far more interested in. Actually, before we go any further, I have some information. I'm recording this as I was editing it, so obviously I sound even sicker now in the future, but it's called Sutter's Fort. I had to go look it up. It's called Sutter's Fort. It is located in downtown Sacramento. It's not some weird Mandela effect on my part. However, it's not what I remembered. I remembered it was like the big logs, and they had the pointy tips, but that actually might have been from a television show. That might have been from like F Troop or something like that. No, it looks kind of nerdy. It's just a really dumb-looking building, but anyways, that was a fort in Sacramento, and they did build the city up around it. It just looks stupid. While I'm adding that detail in, I have some future corrections for stuff I'm going to talk about later in the episode. First off, it turns out there's a lot of Nazi ghosts. I'm like, wait, what? When do you get into that topic? So, yeah, apparently I say that I don't think there's a lot of Nazi ghosts out there. But it turns out the reason why I think that is because I don't live in Germany. If you type in Nazi ghost or ghost of Berlin, you're immediately flooded with a lot of articles about Nazis haunting parts of Germany. So we do have a lot of them. And I'm going to start looking into those. I think that sounds fascinating. And then one more correction or addendum I will address later in the episode. When I make the statement, Woody Allen might be innocent, and the allegations were based on a book his wife wrote, that's not true. Of course, Woody Allen's not innocent, you moron. No. That part I still don't know. What happened was, and I obviously, what does Woody Allen show up in this episode? Oh, trust me, he comes out of nowhere. There was a song written in the 1970s, and Woody Allen goes, the allegations against me are just like that song. The song was called With Daddy in the Attic. And apparently the songwriter and Mia Farrow were good friends or something like that. So Woody Allen says that he's innocent. I say I don't know for sure. And you shut off the podcast right now so you don't have to hear any of the nonsense. But I wanted to add all that stuff in, and then let's go ahead and keep going. Kids see a Civil War man. They think it's a human at this point. Walk out of the woods wearing Civil War uniform. And he says, hey, boys. Because he's talking to them, right? Hey, boys. He says, quote, have you boys seen General Hayes? And they're like, what? Who's General Hayes? And they go, no, we don't even know who that guy is. We haven't seen... I'm not facing the mic because I'm Googling something. I was like, what was the name of that guy? Anyways, I should face the mic. This guy comes out of the woods and says, quote, have you boys seen General Hayes? And they go, no, we have no idea who that is. Or, like, who you're looking for, but we haven't seen him. And the man just kind of looks at him and goes, well, have a nice day then, boys. And then he turns and he walks back into the woods. Now, first, Elliot and his brother think, well, okay, that was weird. Was that like a Civil War reenactor? I mean, that's probably what you would think, right? He's taking it really seriously. Because they said he was dressed in completely, like, authentic clothing. Plus, he had a rifle with him. Musket, I think, was what they had carried back then. But anyways, so later on, Elliot asks his dad, he goes, hey, Dad, something weird just happened. We were outside, and this dude showed up in a soldier uniform, asked for this guy, and he goes, my dad was a history buff. But he was like, it's probably nothing. He just kind of blew him off. Dad probably thought it was a reenactor as well. Well, then, months later, Elliot comes across some information. Okay, listen, I'll say right now, this segment's really gone sideways. Outside of the whole fort story, I just realized I made two major errors when I decided to cover this. Which will become very apparent to you as well. Elliot said, a couple months later, I just came across some information that in my area, around, like he had said in the beginning, a lot of Civil War battles, he said that there was a Brigadier General Hayes who was a commander of troops that fought in that area. In fact, Brigadier General Hayes died very close to where Elliot was living, 150 years later. So he wonders if what him and his brother saw was a ghost coming and was kind of like lost in the area looking for Brigadier General Hayes, who also died in the area. And that's what I thought too when I first read this. But then I just was thinking about it. I go, well, maybe it was a Civil War reenactor. He didn't vanish. The guy just walked back into the woods like a person reenacting the Civil War might do. It could have been a guy just kind of having fun, taking it like a little more. I mean, I've never done Civil War reenactments. I actually really like the Civil War. I think it's cool. I really like studying about it. I used to know a lot about it. But, you're like, Jason, I don't know after what you're about to say. But anyways, maybe he just really liked reenacting the Civil War. And maybe he liked kids, not in a creepy way. But maybe he's like walking through the woods with a rifle, with a musket, and he sees two kids he's never met before, and he goes, I'm going to give them a lifelong love of the Civil War. I'm going to pop out of the woods and ask them if they know somebody. That's how I started loving the Civil War. A stranger asked me a bizarre question. It may have been a Civil War reenactor. There's actually no proof that it's a ghost. I don't know why he thought it was a ghost, and I definitely don't know why I thought it was a ghost. Because all he did was walk into the yard and then walk out. He didn't fly away. He didn't vanish. Just turned around and left. It's possible it was a ghost, though. But here was my major issue with this story. I obviously went and looked up who Alexander Hayes was, and it confirmed that he did die in the area. I was able to kind of find out some of that stuff, but there was one fact I really forgot to check. I don't know why I assumed. I thought that the soldier coming through the woods and Brigadier General Hayes were both members of the Confederacy. Maybe because they were based out of Virginia, and they weren't. They invaded that area. That's why they were there. But I thought they were both Confederate. I thought it was a Confederate soldier, and I thought Alexander Hayes was a Confederate officer. But that's not true. That's why I was looking up the fort thing earlier. When I turned away from the mic, I thought, I better double check this. So the next statement I'm about to make is wrong, but I'm still going to make it. I'm going to change the details of the story, because I think it's an interesting question. I also want to say this wasn't like a 10 or 15 minute long setup for a joke. I do think this is an interesting question. Let's assume that the soldier who came out of the woods was a Confederate soldier, because that makes this question work. If it's a Union soldier, it doesn't really work. It might. But imagine, this is what I was thinking, because my reading skills were not up to par. I thought, okay, this Confederate soldier, this ghost comes out of the woods and says, have you seen General Hayes? Turns and leaves. The boys say no, he turns and leaves. What would happen if a Confederate ghost had walked out of the woods and saw two black kids? Well, Jason, that didn't happen. It was a Union ghost, and the kids were white. I know. But assume the ghost was first off, assume it was a ghost. But secondly, how would that work? Now listen, I understand the Civil War is very complicated. Slavery was a big part of it, but a lot of the people fighting the war, they didn't have slaves. They may not even been thinking about upholding slavery. Probably a little bit, right? I'm not going to totally whitewash it. What I'm saying is that I don't think every single person who fought for the Confederacy was racist. I mean, a lot of them were. But, what would happen if a Confederate soldier who was racist, I gotta turn this heater off, I'm burning up. What happens if a Confederate racist soldier shows up, walks out of the woods, and sees two black kids just hanging out in a backyard? He would have to go, wait a second. What? What's this? You're like, Jason, he would also notice houses looked completely different. He would see cars driving down the road. I think there might be other stuff to flummox him than the fact that there's two black kids. He's probably seen black children playing before, back when he was alive. I mean, so, like, that's the complicated question. Because here's the thing. We know that ghosts will react to remodeling being done in their home. We've seen that kind of a trope at this point. Man, my voice, it's going out. I don't know if we're going to be able to get to that second story, but ghosts seem to react to change. So my question is, we know, like, if people, it's very common. I started remodeling this room, then all this haunted stuff started happening in my house. It's very, very common. What about societal change? Would that also activate haunted experiences? Like, you have a house that's never really been touched, it's antebellum, and some old lady died there back in 1825. Now we're in the year 2025. That would be a 200-year-old house, if you can believe that. In England, that's nothing. That's a toddler house. But in America, that's an old house. And what happens is, this house has not had any ghost sightings or experiences or anything. But then one day, a news broadcast comes on. The family is watching the news. And on the news, they go, hey, everybody, look at this big news involving a black guy. And the house is like, it starts to activate. And they're like, yeah, look at this. This is Denzel Washington, famous actor. He's won all these, has he won an Academy Award? Well, in this universe he did. But look at everyone on the television. The news is just like, look at Denzel Washington. And there's just like a still image of him for 3 minutes. He's smiling. They're like, okay, and now on to weather. And that old lady ghost who was racist, she actually was like super racist back in the day. She is not even like manifesting in the house at all. She's not a smell of perfume or footsteps or rattling doors. The house hasn't been touched, but societal change has happened. It's a white family living in the house, but they're watching a movie. They're watching Lethal Weapon with Mel Gibson and who was the other guy? Danny Glover, I think it was. I never seen the Lethal Weapon. I think I saw one on a date, Lethal Weapon 4 on a date or something like that. I didn't like it, so I don't remember. What happens when it's not physical changes in a home, but societal changes? Could that activate a ghost? I think there would actually be, I kind of skipped a beefy one here, because I wanted to circle back to this, but imagine the house hasn't been remodeled at all, but through the television and the newspaper and the conversations of the people who live in the house that are all white, talk about societal changes involving black people. Could that activate a racist ghost in a house? And really, I mean, the one that I skipped over was, what if they had a racist ghost in a house that had never been touched, the ghost had never been activated, and a black family moves into that house? Could that activate the ghost? That'd be a big change. Now, you'd have to be super racist in life. This is what I believe. I think you'd have to be super racist while you're alive to become a racist ghost. I don't assume that you're just like a live and let live type of person, and then you get shot in the back of the brain and you die in your living room. And then, 5-6 years later, a black family moves in your house. I don't think you would become racist then. I don't think you'd be like, what are they doing in this house? What are you talking about, Jason? What are you talking about? I wonder. That's actually a good question. Could you learn to be racist after you're dead? Could you learn to be intolerant? Like, if there was a group of people you had zero experience with, a certain culture, you had zero experience with them, and then they moved into your house, and they have a particular way of cooking. Like, let's take, for example, like Southeast Asian, right? Thailand, Singapore, something like that. Very, very spicy foods. It's very fragrant. Vietnamese type of dishes. So you're a ghost and you've always just been like, whatever. Color's just on the outside. Doesn't really matter doesn't really matter. It's what your soul is. And then people move in your house and their cooking does not smell good to you. Could you then become a racist ghost? Because you're like floating You're all sticking your head out the window. People just see every so often a phantom face sticking through a window, and they're like, oh, it must be cooking again. It's really weird. We only see that monstrous face through the window whenever they start cooking food over there. Could you become racist? That's actually a really interesting question. Because it really broadens out, like, the basic question, can you learn after you're dead? Could you not know how to play chess and you die? You have no interest in chess, but then 50 years later, a bunch of chess nerds move into your house and you're just kind of like floating there in the corner and you're watching them play so much chess. You're like, you know what? That game does sound pretty cool. Let me possess one of them. The guy's playing chess, all of a sudden, he knocks over the chessboard, he's throwing up, blah, blah. Then he goes, oh, sorry about that. Let's reset this board. I want to give this chess game a try. You bile, still all dripping down your shirt. No. Come on, let's play this game. The Game of Kings. Could you learn more information? And if you could learn more information after you were dead, could your personality change? Could you be a super liberal ghost, a super liberal while you're alive, and then die, and now you're like a staunch conservative in death? I don't know. Right? It's an interesting question, I think. I think when you die, you probably do have access to a lot of information you didn't have access to before. We've talked about the ghostly information superhighway. Ghosts seem to be able to communicate with each other over long distances through mediums, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about you wanting to learn new knowledge, specific new knowledge. Could you retain that knowledge as a spirit? And if that was true, then you would also, I believe, be able to go from a very tolerant, alive human to an intolerant ghost. I don't think it works just one way. If you can gather new information and analyze it and then come up with an opinion, you can also choose to have the wrong opinion. You could go, no, these people are beneath me. I actually used to live with these people. Can you believe that? But now that I'm a ghost, I see how awful they are. Like, that's not a good opinion. That's not a good opinion. But you could form that. If you can learn new information after you've died, I do think you can become an intolerant ghost. A racist ghost. And what if you were racist while you were alive? I mean, I guess you could become non-racist. You could be floating around and be like, oh, this isn't so bad. These guys, they're just like you and me. I mean, they're alive. They still have circulatory systems and eyeballs and things like that. They're more like you than me because I'm a ghost. But now that I've been exposed to them, I see that there's really no spiritual difference between me and other races. That would be fine as well. I'm not saying everyone becomes a bigot after they die, but could it happen? And if a racist died, and then there has to be ghost stories like this. There really has to be stories out there, and I can't think of any off the top of my head. It would be awesome if you guys could do some work on this as well. I'll start looking for them. That's how this show works. Like, I'll come up with an idea, and I'll go, let's see if we can find stories where you had a house that had a bunch of white families living in it, and there were no hauntings, and then a black family moved in, and all of a sudden, the house is haunted. Like, if we could find more than 2 or 3 examples of that, we're onto something. I also, and I'll be honest, you can tell my voice is getting really scratchy. I think that this week we may be doing these smaller, one story. I know, I don't like it either, but it's getting very painful to talk about it. Manuel Venator, I'll have you back tomorrow to fly the Carpenter Copter one final time. I started thinking about Nazis. Nazi ghosts. Which... have you ever heard a Nazi ghost story? There have to be out there. They have to be out there. You had Germany, and everywhere they invaded, but specifically Germany, people were 10 toes invested in Nazi ideology. Now, I know not every German was a follower of Nazism, just like not every American's a Republican, or 4 years ago, not every American was a Democrat. I understand how that works. But you did have people living in the capitals, living in the big cities of Germany, who were staunch supporters of Nazism and Adolf Hitler and all of that stuff. And they got bombed. Their house was destroyed. They had young sons left those houses and fathers as well and got shot in some godforsaken battlefield. You had the Dresden firebombing, which when we did it, America did it, the comment at the same time was that if we lose this war, we're going to be hung for war crimes because of what we did in Dresden. They just basically nuked the city before the nuke was invented. It was horrifying. But it's war. It was, it was mostly civilians living there, but here's, I think they had a couple factories as well. But my point is that We know that Japan had some pretty violent actions done with the nuclear bombs, and there are stories about ghosts in Japan that are related to that. I've come across over the years. Or stories of GI servicemen, U.S. servicemen in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up until today, seeing the ghost of Japanese soldiers. Because we went in, we conquered, we built these bases, but it was still on these islands. We've done like 1 or 2 episodes just about Japanese military ghosts. I'll put those in the show notes. But we're talking about right in the city. We're talking about Dresden. We're talking about Berlin. We're talking about all these people who got killed as they lost the war. And the Soviets moved in on one side and the U.S. troops moved in from the west, and they kind of met in the middle. Imagine you were a Nazi, like a staunch Nazi supporter, and then you get blown to bits. Like you're in bed one night, a bomb lands right in your building, kills 32 people. You're one of them. And then in that exact same spot where you died, 5-10 years later, they put up a new apartment complex or office building or what have you. And as Germany moves forward, it moved as far past as Nazism. It moved as far away from Nazism as it possibly thought it could. And you have all these Nazi ghosts floating around, and they're like, is it okay? Then they would just make that noise. What's your point? Is your point that Nazi ghosts would be disappointed in modern day Germany? Yes. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying like, you know what? Before we pass that new law, why don't we think about the dead Nazis, the ghosts floating around this courtroom right now? No, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing. I just wonder how, because think about it. Have you ever heard of a ghost story involving a Nazi ghost? There should be at least a dozen. At least a dozen. I was going to say at least 100. There probably would be. So many people died violently. And here's the thing, because you go, well, maybe there are Nazi ghosts. Well, I would assume if you were a Nazi ghost, you would kind of make it pretty clear you were a Nazi. Like an old woman dies in her sleep, comes back as a ghost. Every so often you smell perfume. You can go, that's probably that old lady who used to live here, who died. But if you were a Nazi supporter and you got blown to bits, I don't think you would just have the smell of pipe tobacco wafting through the house. You'd probably be like really agitated. Right? You're floating around and you're like, I could be kind of a pleasant ghost, but look at this. Look at all of these Jewish people who live in my neighborhood now. I'm going to go, like, I can't stand for this. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. This ghost, this Nazi German ghost is saying that. He goes, I can't stand for this. So it's not like he's going to be, he would probably make, like, loud footsteps walking around. You know what, actually, we did cover a story like this once, but I think it was in America, where a relative brought home a Nazi dagger or a Nazi pistol, or something like that. Put it in the basement, and the kid who lived, the relative who lived in the basement, started experiencing super intense haunted activity, like a dark figure standing at the edge of the bed, kind of messing with him. That was just one relic of that soldier. I think it was an SS officer that was hundreds of miles away from the battlefield, hundreds of miles away from the bones of his family and the ashes of his friends. And it was so powerful. They didn't get rid of it. I think they put it in the sub-basement. I think they got rid of it somehow, but if something like that can be so charged, just imagine the city of Berlin. I do have a theory on this. We got to wrap this up. This popped in my head. We know that the Soviet Union really clamped down on their UFO stories. After the fall of the Soviet Union, we started getting decades worth of alien encounters and UFO sightings from behind the Iron Curtain. It's possible the same thing happened with ghost stories as well. Because you didn't want to stand out in the Soviet Union. In any sort of communistic type society, you don't want to stand out. You want to just go with the flow. You've been assigned a job, you do your job, you come home. If you start kind of making moves for yourself, you're getting a target on your back. They're going to think you're a disruptor or an agitator, and they're going to disappear you. I mean, that's just what happens in systems set up like that. Everyone just has to be the same. It's a worker ant mentality. No one wants the ant who's dancing like John Travolta. What? What? Well, what was it? Ants or A Bug's Life or something like that? The ant dances like John Travolta. And the other ants go, stop doing that. Just carry your sugar down to the queen. And he's still dancing. Wasn't Woody Allen as the voice of an ant? It was a weird movie. It was a weird movie to be sure. He's all, hey, so where does the queen keep her eggs? That's disgusting. That's disgusting. We got to wrap this up. Here's the thing. I made that Woody Allen joke. I don't know if he actually committed the crime that he was accused of. It's very interesting. We talked about that before on the show. He definitely has a couple screws loose for sure. But I remember once I really sat down and I'm going to read up on this whole Woody Allen guy. We used to watch movies when we were kids. My parents were big fans. Then he got accused of all this stuff, and my parents are like, oh, this guy's gross. I don't know if he did it. It's interesting. I'll put some links in the show notes. You're like, wow, what a weird veer, Jason. He went from Civil War ghost to Nazi ghost to now Woody Allen might be innocent. I don't know. It's really bizarre. He may have done it, I don't know, but in short, from what I understand, he was accused of the same thing that his wife wrote in a book, like a fictional book. And then she basically used that same setup for that book and accused him of doing it. It was like pretty wildly made up type of allegation. But once it got into the mainstream media that he's a pervo, people just kind of go, we don't want to work with you anymore. Even though people did continue to work with him, he obviously was the voice of an ant. And that movie was shot like in the early 2000s. Yeah, I'll see if I can find that. I wouldn't go to war for Woody Allen. I definitely wouldn't stand up and say, no, he's innocent. And don't get me started on P. Diddy. Talk about a railroad job. But here's the thing. I always assumed he was innocent. He was dead to rights. But apparently, like, the same accusation appeared in a book written 5-10 years earlier. Like, beat by beat. Let's go. That's when I went from believing he was guilty because I didn't really care. So I just heard what people were saying and I just said, yeah, probably, and just reinforced it, to maybe like 20 years later reading about him and going, wow, he might actually not have done that. Or he might have. I don't know. But that's where we're ending today's episode. What is this? I'm sweating really. It actually took a lot for me to get and record this. So I hope you guys liked it. I just want to get over this, but I didn't want to give you no content. I think this is a good episode. I just wish it was longer, but, I want to put out more episodes in the week. I don't want to just do one episode like I did last week and spend the rest of the week sick. Manuel Venator, you'll be back one last time to fly the Carpenter Copter. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be your email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. TikTok is @DeadRabbitRadio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal conspiracy and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm so glad you listened to it today. Have a great one, guys.